So everybody that's listening, we thank you for that. Steve Laffey back on the program, a former presidential candidate here in 2024, a former mayor of Cranston, Rhode Island from '03 to '07. And he's a man of many things, we should say, financial man, we should say. We're going to dive deep into that. But I do want to talk about New Hampshire in just a second. But Steve, thanks so much for always coming on the program. Greatly appreciate it.
Rob, I love being on with you. Great questions and great audience. So let's just go. Wherever you want to go, we'll go.
Let's kick this around then. New Hampshire primary. Governor DeSantis from Florida dropped out yesterday. He didn't really have a chance in New Hampshire anyway. He's only polling at 6%. Nikki Haley gaining steam due to the independents really being able to vote in New Hampshire, empowering her campaign against President Trump. You were in New Hampshire for quite a while throughout your presidential campaign in the early days of 2003 going into 2024. Let's talk about that. What do you feel like is going to happen in New Hampshire tomorrow? It is.
Trump will crush Nikki Haley, and then Haley will get out of the race. She can't afford to get destroyed in her home state of South Carolina by like 50 or 60 points. A couple backdrop things, though. This shows in highlights why no state should have an open primary or a quasi-open primary. Several thousand Democrats disaffiliated to become independents so they could vote against Donald Trump. Independents, when you're a Republican, you don't know who to mail to, you don't know which door to knock on. This is all the Republican Party of every state needs to change this to make sure that primaries are closed. The second point is that I just want to make sure everybody knows I did not take off in New Hampshire. Fine. I was the only candidate that actually had a different situation that could have challenged President Trump if the media had decided that they wanted Trump to really lose. The people who are losing and dropping out are complete sycophants and backstabbers, as I said on February 1st when I announced. Everybody listening to the show knows people like this. They love you, you get them a job, they try to take your job. Then you hate them. We all, as Republicans, hated the governor in New Jersey, Christie, from day one. We've hated him for years because he backstabbed Mitt Romney by hugging Obama in 2012. Remember what a terrible governor he was? So he announced saying he was going to take down Trump, and his best line was that people would call Donald Trump Donald Duck. Maybe the worst thing I've ever heard in any debate, including my own in Cranston, ever. Worse than a man who put up a 40-foot gorilla sign to try to defeat me. He ended up in federal jail later on in his life. He was the worst. But DeSantis and Haley, DeSantis won in 2018 because he ran commercials like feeding babies Trump food or whatever it was, right? And then Nikki Haley took a job as United Nations, whatever, did nothing, cites nothing. I mean, she cites like things that you and I could have done in our sleep as success. And now she's like running against them and criticizing them. So there was never a chance, as I correctly stated from why I got into the race. And the press, of course, would like Trump to face Biden, and they were always wrong about that. They were always wrong. So tomorrow it'll be over by 6 p.m.
Yeah. It's truly sad what's going on in our society, but also what's going on as far as elections, because we have terrible candidates that are running for office on both sides of the aisle, and no one really is talking about the big problems that are affecting our society. I just want to dive a little bit deeper into the primary. I know you went to Iowa. You were in Iowa. You went on the show, Joe Stein's show. He has a big show over there in Cedar Rapids, and they loved you there. Regardless of that, they called Iowa 30 minutes after the polls closed. People were still voting. Again, regardless if you like Governor DeSantis or not, he had a big ground game. They had Governor Reynolds behind him, the evangelical group behind him, some talk radio people, a lot of state senators, state house people in Iowa behind him there. But again, regardless if you like the governor or not, that was a scam. People are saying, why even go and vote? Why even go to
Yeah.
the caucus? If it's going to close 30 minutes, not close, but they will call the race 30 minutes after the polls close. People were still voting. And there was talks about people saying, what's the point? Why are we
Yeah.
even here if they're going to call the election for Trump? Again, I'm not saying that Governor DeSantis would have won if Fox News and CNN and ABC didn't call the race for Trump 30 minutes after the polls closed. But you got to give the people a chance to vote. I
Yeah.
mean, come on, man. This is a joke. So,
Yeah.
when they talk about our democracy is in trouble, this is the democracy we're
Yeah.
supposed to have, and people's votes don't count because they're calling the races before people even get a chance.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't count. I mean, they closed this primary with that first debate, keeping people like
Like
myself out
you.
of it. Whereas in 2011 or 2015, I would have been in the debate. I was like Mr. Number 9 or 10 at the time. So when they changed the rules, the ones that I mentally, morally couldn't do without, we've already talked about that. And then you talk about Congressman Hurd couldn't, all these things that narrowed the field at the beginning to leave it with sycophants basically and Trump in the Republican Party. And then you alluded to the fact that we have a big problem with voting. And so since 2020, no matter how you feel about it, what has been done by state after state after state to make sure that everybody in that state would say, oh, voting would be correct. Whatever happens, we're going to be correct. I posit to people, maybe there is a state that changed the way they do things, took away the internet, put things, the way that voting should be is that you vote, someone's sitting there, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, they challenge you. Hey, Jimmy, you don't live in that district. Jimmy, you don't live in that state. Jose, you're not a U.S. citizen. You still fill out the vote. You put it in a dispute pile. We'll get to it later. Very few people. Next, you take that piece of paper, you put it in a box. It records it. The box stays. People are watching the box, staring there, watching at the box all day long. The box then gets put chains around it. They add up the votes. They take it to somewhere where state troopers, Republicans, Democrats, independents, Ross Perot people, they're watching it. You wait until you win. Anybody wants a challenge. You can challenge if you win 1%, 0.5%, whatever it might be for each race. Then you go find the boxes. No one's touched them. They have chains around them, right? They're not on the internet. Then you get to open them with everybody looking. Wouldn't that be a way to vote? And then we get a decision. We're going to have a 2024 election where nothing's been changed, where stuff is going to be on the internet. They're going to put things in little computer on the side of the thing, take out the information and go give it to somebody. I'm not saying anybody's cheating. I have no knowledge of that. What I'm saying is that the public deserves better. But then you ask yourself the question, the public doesn't demand this stuff. Does it deserve better? Wouldn't this have been an issue for everybody in America to get together and agree upon? So in Iowa, you're right. These people don't care. Fox doesn't care. They just couldn't care less about you, about what happens to your children. And yet you're tuned into Fox News. I haven't watched it in 9 years. Yeah. They're tuned into Fox News like, oh, Fox News said this. It must be true. This is really what the problem is with our democracy. We have a bunch, and I saw this in New Hampshire. We can go into the whole thing where people have no idea what's going on. I mean, right. The Ramsawamy people who showed up in New Hampshire, that's a whole book I could write about how goofy they were. Ramsawamy thinking that as a practicing Hindu, he was going to take Iowa, despite campaigning there, spending more money, going to 3 times as many events. 4%? 5%? Come on. Ramsawamy. I'm a practicing Hindu. There is one God. It's Brahma, but I don't want to tell you that. So I'll say that Jesus is one of the sons of God, which totally ticks off everybody. And as I said to you, and I said to everybody back in June or July, he was never going to South Carolina, ever. And I was right. So the only thing I have to be right about at the end is that when you see what's happening in Michigan for the general election, and we can get off this topic, when you see that there's a black 41-year-old UAW worker with a new contract who's building cars and says in the paper yesterday, the cars I'm building, I can't afford to buy any of them. Yeah. That person's not voting for Joe Biden, folks. They're blaming him for the inflation. So the Democrats will have to do something in a switcheroo once Trump has nailed down the election for that side. If they have a chance of winning, well, that's the next step.
Just to interject, the Democratic Party wanted Trump from the start. Yes, they don't have to run on anything. They just say democracy, January 6th. They have no policies. We've saw that the past 4 years. They want
Right.
Trump. The mainstream media wants Trump because they're going to make tons and tons and tons
Yes.
of money writing
Money.
books with these reporters are writing books about
Right.
interviewing Trump and
Right.
January 6th and this and that. So they want that. And then it's just a whole big sham, like you said, in the people that are voting. And I really feel bad to say this about our regular everyday Americans, but they want this person that's a reality TV show host. I was just talking to a DeSantis person before you came on, Mayor, and he was saying, again, whether we like Governor DeSantis or not, he was saying that these Trump people, he asked them, what has President Trump done in the past 4 years as president of the United States when he was in there? And they say, well, the tax cut. Okay, well, whether we like the tax cut or not, we'll put that down as he got that done. He didn't do anything about Obamacare. He said he was going to build this wall. He didn't do that, whether we like that or not. He hasn't done anything on immigration. He botched the pandemic. I mean, the list goes on and on. And these people
Yeah.
just stand by this guy because he's a reality TV show host and he says some of the stuff that they feel is true. But when he gets in power, he doesn't get anything done.
Yeah. And most of the Republicans, 70% of them think he's going to stick it to the elite when he's actually the biggest one in the elite. So I saw this in New Hampshire. And in fact, my last speech in front of 500 people, first Congressman Hurd spoke. It was Labor Day, my last big speech. And then you had Asa Hutchinson, and then you had Mike, former vice president.
Pence, yeah.
And then you had me, and then you had Ramsawamy, who finished up. But I'll never forget this one part where a guy comes up to me. People, of course, when I'm speaking, because Mike Pence finishes, and he finishes his speech by saying, like the other two, I still think it's morning in America. He says it actually right to the, and I'm like, what? It's like the ninth inning. We're at bat. We're down 3 runs. There's no one on base. There's 2 strikes, and Riviera just showed up throwing a cutter. Like, what are you talking about, Mike? What was he running for? Like, what do you mean it's morning in America? The national debt's the high. We could go on all day about this stuff. And yet he's saying this, then he wanders off. There's 2 important points. One, I get up and say, if you kind of like that, you're not going to like what I have to say. And I go into the fact that we're broke. Now, people are not. We're the worst generation in America. We screwed our children. We screwed the fire breather. And so after I'm done, people are clapping. They know I'm right, but they're not in a crisis because people sent them checks, right? So there's 2 things about it in New Hampshire that would never happen 20 years ago. Well, the first one might have. A guy who worked for the Federal Reserve Board for 45 years walks up to me and he says, I've never heard anything like this. You're exactly right. Every number you say is exactly right. You'd be a great president. And then he says, but here's the problem. I think the guy to my left and the guy to my right, they don't know what you're talking about. and so it was kind of funny. The second part was out of the people kept coming up. Now, when I've been making major speeches before, it doesn't matter where I've been around the country, it doesn't matter in Rhode Island when I was mayor or running for the U.S. Senate, the people there were local people. So if I'm in Smithfield, Rhode Island, they're from Smithfield. If I'm at the Texas Tea Party leadership being the keynote speaker, they're from Texas. In New Hampshire, I was expecting all 500 people sitting there with all the cameras to be from Salem, New Hampshire. There were people coming up. I'm from Rhode Island. I just drove up to see that. They didn't even know I was there, let's say. Oh, Mayor Laffey, boop, boop, boop. I'm like, what are you doing here? It's Labor Day. It's a beautiful day. It's like 95 degrees here. Oh, I just go to these things. And I never heard that before. I heard it from a dozen people. So now you have a Taylor Swift sort of like groupie thing that's happening in politics. These weren't Salem, New Hampshire. Now, there were some from Salem, New Hampshire. Don't get me wrong. And the guy who runs Salem, New Hampshire Republican Party, totally great guy. But there were hundreds of people that were just, hey, I'm going to this. And I'm like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't drive down to Colorado Springs right now to see anybody speak. I hate to tell you, folks, but I could watch it on TV. I could do this. But so you have a whole different group of people, and they're ready for a fight. They're just ready for a fight. And so this is a really bad thing for our country. And I think you have all these things coming together with the fact that financially, I mean, think about it. Just on Social Security, Trump won't touch it. So DeSantis says he won't touch it. Nikki Haley's forced to say she'll raise the retirement age 8. We don't know how much. We don't know. On some of the younger people, we don't know the actual numbers. No one seems to care. They just print it. So nobody's going to fix these problems until we hit the crisis. And the crisis simply, listen carefully, folks. We're going to roll $7.6 trillion of debt this year at much higher rates than it was issued at because Janet Yellen and the clowns before her, when rates were zero, refused to issue 30-year bonds. Over 3 years starting today, it's half the national debt. 15.5 trillion gets rolled, has to be so if you have any calculator on, you could put a trillion on it. Put 15 trillion on it, and then multiply by 0.02 or 0.03, because that's how much higher at the minimum rates are going to be to issue new debt if anybody wants it. And so that's the real problem. Like that's what we have to fix, because what's going to happen is one of two things. Either rates will rise because nobody wants the 20-year bond, even if they start issuing none of them like Janet Yellen wants to, still no one will want it. And then we'll have a crisis, right? Because mortgage rates will be higher, or they will repress the rates and run inflation higher. So everybody in the middle class making, depending where you live, $60,000 to $150,000 nowadays, are totally hosed.
Yeah.
Like you're totally hosed for 20 years. That's our choices, because these are the candidates. This is the media. And what I'm saying to you is absolutely true. And no one gives a rat's patina about it, except me and maybe some of your listeners.
Well, no one has the balls to say it either.
They won't say it.
Well, besides you, I mean,
Yeah.
but these other guys, and Trump and these other guys, they're inept. They're never going to talk about it. And they probably don't even know what the hell's going on anyways. Biden sure as hell doesn't know what the hell
No, he
is
has
going
no
on.
idea. And that's why I really think, Rob, he won't be the candidate. I still believe that's late February to middle of March. They to pull the switcheroo.
Well, who do you see? Let's ask you that. Michelle Obama. We saw what Gavin Newsom against Ron DeSantis. I did watch that debate. Ron DeSantis seemed to wipe the floor with Gavin Newsom. He's a slick guy, good-looking guy.
Right.
I know a lot of women would probably vote for him like they did with Bill Clinton, but he didn't do well in a debate against Ron DeSantis. So are you thinking it's a Michelle Obama move here or what?
I can't imagine it would be Michelle, but it's going to be, it has to be somebody, because today in Michigan, a swing state, Trump is ahead by like 12 points. And so the margin of error, and the question would be, as we head through 2024, how does that get better for Joe Biden as he stumbles, as he can't speak, as he probably would refuse to debate Trump, then Trump would hold his own debates. I mean, Trump is smart enough to hold a debate with a clown figure of Biden, and they'll cover it, and he'll talk to a doll. He'll talk to a man with a Muppet, and they'll just be laughing because he's funny. Trump is pretty funny. So they need somebody who will literally make that, because everything's on the margin, make that suburban housewife who, for whatever reason, has no idea who she's voting for. I'm not making fun of her or him, right? Say, you know what? Trump's unacceptable. He abuses women. He ran up debt, whatever, blah, blah, blah. That guy or that lady seems normal, has a normal family, isn't too old, especially if it's someone like, say, 60 or 55 to 65, 65, 55 to 60, someone who has enough experience, not a Ramswamy at 30. I'm not making fun of 38-year-olds, but he clearly wasn't ready. I mean, this is ridiculous. But somebody who's they can recognize and get all the money behind. But the Democrats have a chance to do that. The Republicans would never do it because they're never united. And that's that. Therein lies the problem. So it's January, whatever, and we have a month or two where this is either going to happen, or, hey, the governor of Michigan, the senator from Michigan, is like, hey, basically saying in the paper yesterday, we're going to get our asses kicked. So how many more people are going to say this, and then they're just going to go forward and get their asses kicked? I guess with Goldwater they did, or with Nixon in 72, McGovern did. They had to know he was going to lose. Maybe they'll do it again. It just seems unlikely.
Well, Trump's lost a little bit of a step too. Nothing like Biden.
No, nothing.
I mean, Biden's in a totally different wavelength than we are. But Trump's lost a step too. He was on the air yesterday. He said that he was mixing up Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley about January 6th. And he
maybe
said
he did it on purpose. Maybe that's a good joke. I don't know, but
yeah, he said a couple other things that have been like that in the past. So
well, that's why the comparison, no matter what, Trump may have lost a step from his very high IQ. He's a very smart man, to Biden being like a disaster. Like, whoa, that if someone replaces him and who's really someone like me, someone who remembers who their first grade teacher is, knows what's going on, can keep and can run circles around Trump in a debate, then Trump has a problem. But right now, I don't see how he does.
Well, that's what I was getting into, that DeSantis and Haley, of course, after tomorrow, I agree with you there, will both have suspended their campaigns. If Trump somehow gets indicted, this is all going to happen. I'm not saying Trump is going to get indicted on 91 counts, but it could be one or two out of the 90.
You mean
that he
found
gets,
guilty? Because he's indicted on
guilty.
91
Yeah,
counts.
excuse me.
He's guilty of having a charity in New York. He had to pay out money for that. He's guilty of abusing a woman by a court. He's going to pay $5 or $10 million, and forget all the other cases. He's obviously guilty of taking home secret documents, not bringing them back, put them in a bathroom, whipping around and talking about them. It's obviously against the law. As I've said, Trump seems to want to cite and get away with it the law that says you cannot do that. Section 2022 of the whatever it is, the federal election laws at 74. It's like me citing, like, I robbed the bank. And let me just tell you why it's okay. And I hold up the law that says you cannot rob banks. That's what Trump does. And he gets away with it. I wouldn't get away with it. He gets away with it. So the question is he going to be found guilty in a court of law? And the weird thing is about these people who want to put him in jail is that they're terrible prosecutors. Why did they wait so long? Like, what's wrong with these people? These trials are now all being delayed, right? And so it could be that in November they're still waiting for trials and he pardons himself. But who knows?
They're very inept people in general, but
you can't. It's hard to believe how inept. If you and I were Democrats and we were like controlling things, and we would have, like, right after the election, right, Trump can't come back. What are we going to get him on? We'd wait. The day he didn't give back those documents, we would indict him on one count of holding secret documents. We would have went after Pence too, except Biden himself you couldn't go after him because, well, he had secret documents. He had them lying around in different places, in garages. This is why it made me so angry, and why I don't know why DeSantis and other people didn't take advantage of just say, well, they didn't announce in the right way. They couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. But saying that, and what I said is that there's a colonel in Florida. He simply took home some toxic secret documents. He's in jail for 3 years. He didn't do anything with them. He just was lazy. He either forgot, he pleaded. Why would Trump not get 10 years if we have a real rule of law? And why did that trial didn't take 3 years? They found him, they put him in jail. I cited this guy's case over and over. He wasn't espionage. He simply brought home secret documents. A colonel lived in Florida where Trump lives, jail 3 years. So Trump's thing is way worse. When asked to send him back, he says no. That's when he should have been indicted. But yes, we're dealing with extraordinarily inept people. Like, how about the Attorney General of Georgia, who seemingly now has been dating someone they've been paying and going on trips? Woo! I mean, do they all want to go to jail? Do they all want to? Who would do that? They don't. They're just dumb. They're just dumb as rocks,
I want to end on this last point. Actually, two last points, and then we'll move on, Steve.
Yeah.
Second to last point. What's going on with this country? Why, it seems like in the past, again, I'm only in my early 30s, but it seems like our past leaders, whether we like them or not, they seemed like they were pretty noble people.
Yeah.
They weren't into all this rigmarole and hooting and hollering and yelling and screaming. There was some policy behind it, whether you agreed with them or not, on both sides of the aisle. Now it seems like these guys are all characters on the Democrat side and on the Republican side for the most part. There's very few politicians now that actually say what they mean and mean what they say. It seems like the country is going into this place where, again, every other country in the world is laughing at us, starting with China, going down the list, because the leaders are jokes.
Yeah, certainly if you were to go back and say the last 4 presidents, it's all just headed downhill, quite frankly. My humble estimation, I think a lot of it has to do with the public schools over 30 years, a lot to do with the internet and where people actually get their news. I may be the last, and I say this with all honesty, I'm the last remaining person that when I get on a plane, I have 3 or 4 newspapers with me, and I'm actually reading the news. I look around. Doesn't seem to be one person not interested in putting on some violent movie next to me that like no one should be looking over their shoulder on the plane. And they're like 45-year-old people. They just have checked out. I have the Wall Street Journal. I pick up IBD. I get the New York Times. I got 3 hour flight. And I pencil through all these things that people have seen me on Substack where I circle things and I give them to my kids. And so their children, not my children, and I have lots of friends like this who have grown up to be very liberal because they just said, oh, I guess the public schools are okay. We'll just put them over there. Public schools are terrible, teaching terrible things. I'll send them away to college. I don't do that. I send them right here where I keep an eye on them. And they're like, and I don't send them until they have a brain big enough to have a philosophy to understand that the free market works and statism is bad. And they believe in Jesus and whatever. Then I send them. And because they're supposed to be a light to other people. But the other people, most people don't do this. I have had countless friends. Can you help my child? He blah, blah, blah. Countless friends. I have no idea why my kid, was so liberal. And it's because
Yeah,
they just
they
didn't
do
pay
it.
attention. Now, maybe in the 50s with that previous generation, you didn't pay much attention. What was a school of hard knocks? These things didn't exist. My parents didn't really ever tell me anything, quite frankly. I had a very troubled family, but there were people in the neighborhood, which I write about in my book, Primary Mistake, who were great guides of moral, what to learn, read this book, here, take this home. I don't see this happening hardly at all. So it's a long-winded answer, but I don't know how we turn that around. When you go to a store and you try to give someone $50 for a 23, not even change, and the person doesn't know what to give you back, that's a problem.
That's true. And yeah, and I've seen it multiple times when I've been at the store that if you pay cash, they have trouble counting. It's very sad. I want to go into this with the last part of this and then move into the economy.
Yeah,
You were overseas for a little bit of time after you
yeah.
ended your presidential campaign. I know you were in Greece, but you were in multiple other countries during that period of time. Can you speak about what the people were saying about America while you were over there, whether it was political, economics, whatever it may be?
Yes, I took a 30-day trip starting in Athens and ending up in Rome, but I was in Croatia, Albania, islands, and so forth, and Greece and so forth. But and I never thought I'd get to Albania, which was a wonderful place to go. But yes, one, still to this very day, and I said this 20 years ago, if I said to anybody over there, I've got this magic box, we're going to put you in it, take you back to America. Do you want to go? It's 50 grand. Yes. 100 grand. Yes. Like people would still just come, you know. Two, people still, I mean, where I was in these places, people loved Americans. Um, there wasn't as much of a conversation with many of these people because mostly I saw them for very brief periods. I wasn't like, say, I was back in Cranston sitting around a bar, or I don't drink, but sitting around a coffee shop and for hours. So the glimpses I got was that America is still the place to go. Yet, um, people in Albania were talking about swimming back in the day to Greece when Albania was closed. I mean, we as Americans have no idea how bad people struggle. Cab
Yeah.
drivers who are also butchers taking me around Albania. I mean, and I did videos on this where it's so heartbreaking, to see people want freedom. And these people with the country that mostly have it in some way, shape, or another, but they want freedom. And this is why I'm still quite the strong national defense. America is a beacon of light. I am not an isolationist. I've always believed, like Reagan, like people before him, like Teddy Roosevelt, the more people we can get to live free, given the constraints of what we can and can't do, right? We can't invade China right today, right? So we should try to help because the more there are people with freedom like this, the better off we are, selfishly. And so that's why I've always had that opinion that we should help people be free whenever we can.
Since you brought that up, I was going to go into financial issues
Yeah.
since we touched on that a little earlier, but I wanted to dive deeper into it. But since you're going more into defense, let's hit on that. Obviously, Ukraine war is still going on. We're still funding them. There's a fight in Congress to give them more money between the Democrats and the Republicans. Some on the Republican side are against it, some are for it, and mostly every Democrat is for funding it. There's also talk about funding Israel. my question is, again, it goes back to the debt and the deficit and funding issues in our own country, whether it's social services or other issues in our country in general. Where again is all this money coming from? I know it's coming from we're printing it, but it's going to eventually come to a head. It's already come to a head in general, but stuff is going to get extremely worse than it is now. Do we have to cut some of these issues back? Whether it is on the Ukraine issue, whether it is on Israel. I'm not saying that
Mhm.
we don't maybe advise them, but we have to kind of look at some of these issues and say, you know what? We are America. We are the leader and the beacon of hope for the world, but we have to get our priorities in order before we start giving out money to all
Yeah.
these other countries. Because, for instance, Israel can well afford to, you know, help themselves. They have Mossad. Those are the best spies in the world. Their defense is the best in the world besides us, maybe in Russia, if you want to put them in on it. But we have to look at these issues. Don't you agree with that as
Yeah,
far as
I do, and I
defense?
take them one by one. So, for
Sure.
example, when I announced for president February 1st, I said I'm running because our country refuses to directly confront its problems, and we must unite the country over restoring the middle class. But the problem has been Russia. Let's just say it's a problem. It was always a problem. It was a problem when they incurred in the country of Georgia. It was a problem when they took Crimea. We could go through the 8 different incursions they had. We did nothing about. So here's a country, America, when we could have just shut it down, shut them down, or as I said the night before they invaded. I know people would see this, would say, "Wow, would this guy have really done this?" Their troops in Belarus, if we NATO forces, the coalition of willing, had taken them out in Belarus, would there have been a war? There would not have been a war. What did we do instead? We let them come in. We're totally shocked that Ukraine wants to defend themselves. I'm not, but everybody else seems to be shocked that they're not overrun within 30 days. So now we start to help them. We help them the most. We don't tell the American people exactly where the money's going. So all the rumors are like it's going to like rich oligarchs, which isn't happening. But my point is this: we should have won the war immediately. There never should have been a first winter where the troops of Ukraine weren't giving enough to break through the Sea of Azov, right? And cut off the Russian troops. But we didn't do that. We gave them enough to kind of make this part where they're in a stalemate, looking like a mini World War One, right? With trench lines built.
Yeah.
Now,
But
why
doesn't
didn't we
this
just,
go back to 2014 with Obama, with
yeah,
Victoria Nuland, who's in the State
yeah.
Department now? They were pushing to go into Ukraine and redo that government. They did that. Zelensky came in 2019. He wanted to make peace, and they told him that he wasn't going to do that with Russia.
Yeah. And so these things should have been, I mean, go all the way back to when the Ukraine had a third of all the Soviet Union's nuclear missiles, and they were given back under not a treaty. They should have demanded a treaty under an agreement that the UK and us would come in if Russia came in after them. That was our agreement. They never should have given those missiles back. They should have been pointed directly at Moscow. Then that wouldn't happen. So my point is, if I were president and went to war, or whatever you would want to call attack, or whatever you want to call this, it would be overwhelming winning and leaving. George Bush the elder showed us that in Iraq a little bit. Reagan showed us a little bit of that in little old Grenada, right? But that's the only way. The American public now is like turning against Ukraine.
Yeah, but
People are
Steve, we don't
suffering.
even have enough men, and we went into this in a past podcast together. We don't have enough men and women that are physically fit in the
Well, that's a
military.
whole, again, yes,
You
that's a
know,
whole other thing. But we do have, if you add up NATO forces,
yeah.
look at, they can't even fight Ukraine. This is beautiful to show how bad Russia's military really is. So we should have already won this war. And unfortunately, under people like Biden, who, when I said, and think of Trump did some good things, don't get me wrong. He talked about getting out of Afghanistan, never did it. I predict he never would have. And what Biden did to get out of Afghanistan, which 12-year-olds could have handled it better. And think about it. Either Biden and his people don't understand the term sunk cost. In other words, so what is sunk cost? I wouldn't have gone into Afghanistan. I said that clearly many years ago. But once we were there for so long, it's like $2 billion a year, and I don't want to lose any soldiers. We might have been losing two per year. I don't want to lose any. But the sunk cost to now bring freedom to people over 30 years and have a base that we can wallop people in the area, including Russia, never should have been given up. And what happened to the women? What happened to our allies who were fighting? They've been raped, murdered,
Yeah.
chased down. Are any women not wearing stupid scarves? They all are. So the freedom went away. Imagine if people forget. They don't know. They don't forget. Americans just don't know that South Korea, after North and South, with the treaty there, the truce or whatever it was, 30 years later, South Korea was a basket case in the early 80s. And now it's a powerhouse. It takes a couple of generations. Afghanistan could have been a place of freedom. Imagine that being, take a look at the map, folks, if you don't know where it is, right? So this was massive stupidity, which Putin thought, I'll go into Ukraine. They won't fight back. His generals told him all lies. They stole half the stuff. Think we have problems with corruption. Russia's like tenfold. So then you take Israel, whole different case. Israel, what were they doing? I mean, you can go watch at stevelaffey.com, me talking about giving up the Gaza Strip as idiocy, because the Palestinians are not a people, and they deserve to live in an open air prison at best. Nobody wants Palestinians. No Palestinian that you can find on YouTube has stood up, raised their hand, and said, wow, my people are stupid. I want peace with Israel. None of them. They all want to kill Jews. So they need to stay there. Egypt won't take any of them. They nearly destroyed the country of Jordan. Then they went to Lebanon. They destroyed Lebanon. They're sitting in this prison. Let them sit there forever. And I
I
would
come from it at a different way, not so much on the Palestinian wavelength, but more so on that Netanyahu had an issue there where a lot of people didn't like him. I believe personally, I've talked to somebody that is still negotiating with the hostages in Israel. He is an Israeli, and he was in the Israeli military, and he said, personally, he believes that they kind of let that happen.
yeah.
And
Well,
that's
I
kind
don't
of
know
where
the
I'm
answer,
at.
but
And if they let that happen, that's not correct
well,
on the government.
think about it. You say Israel, we say Israel has a great, we always thought this, but think about it. So they're letting 19,000 Palestinians come into the country every day and leave. 18,999 are spies.
Yeah.
Okay. They thought it was a good idea. I didn't think it was a good idea. Someone thinks it's a good idea. So imagine the scenario. I'm visiting Tel Aviv and my kids who are 20 and I have kids who are older. Hey, Dad, we're going up near the Gaza Strip. It's like 5 miles away. There's going to be a big party. Go to a rock concert. I'm like, yeah, don't come back. If you're that stupid, don't even come back. So what were they doing there? Second, Israel, everybody's in the military except for the people who have all the kids, right? All the Orthodox, right? They don't have to be in the military, which is another really dumb thing. Everybody needs to be in the military in that country. They're surrounded by enemies. They can have 10, 12 kids. They still need to be in the military. Think about it. At that point, wouldn't we, if we ran Israel, say, you know what? Everybody who was in the military can handle a gun. We have staff sergeants. We have retired reserve people with colonels. We have a cachet of stuff hidden in those places where in a town of 5,000, 200 know where to go.
Yeah.
The people who came in and raped and murdered were like a TV show Rat Patrol when I was a kid. They were like, what do you mean no one stopped them. No one shot them dead. Within 3 or 4 minutes, people should be training in Israel everywhere how to get a hold of a gun. This would have been stopped. The people coming would have been shot dead. They never would have come in. But to your point, are we saying it's possible that people tripped wires and nobody knew? Are we saying that people tripped these wires coming across? Nobody was there to greet them? What the hell are you talking about? Like, this makes no sense at all how that ever happened. But now what do? They spend all this money bombing stuff, flooding stuff. The Hamas real leaders, they'll kill some. The other ones are sitting in Switzerland. The real problem, again, I said this February 1st, we refuse as Americans to directly confront our problems. The problem is Iran. If Israel was allowed to, with us and Saudi Arabia, to drop bunker busting bombs on Iran and to kill their leaders, everybody would wake up and go, huh, because if I was president, that's what I would do. And then I would give a speech that says just this: We just killed the main leaders of Iran's, whatever you want to call those crazy people. And we dropped bunker bombs where they were trying to think they were going to have nuclear weapons. Anybody else want to try us? You're going to get the same stuff. The next speech I would give would be, listen, to Americans, there's countries you're not going to go to. Don't go. If you go, we're not coming in to help you out. Nobody should be in Russia. Nobody should be in Pakistan. Here's the list of other countries you can go to. I want everybody to know, you screw with those people, it's going to be like Roman times. We're going to come find you and your relatives and everybody that did this to them, and we're going to exterminate you. We don't care about the government. Americans get to go to Mexico. Americans get to go to whatever, we'll name a country. That's people, we need to put the fear into people of what America will do. And given the fact that we have all these enemies uniting against us, if I were president, I would pick one, probably Iran. But an easy one would be Venezuela. Maduro would be removed. Another easy one would be Cuba. Well, why have they been existing next to us for all this time? It seems crazy, right? So, but American strength would then, no different than disciplining kids. My kids knew growing up, if I said, if you do that, this is what happens. They did it once, exactly what I said happened, whatever it was. They were like, oh, that's when he says don't do or do this, take out the garbage, whatever it might be, it gets done. That's it. Like if when I said in Cranston, we're only going to build a police station once the bonds rating goes investment grade, I called a press conference the next day and built a police station that was standing before I left. That's it. Everybody knew if I said don't do this, whatever it might be, everybody knows exactly what I'll do. But that's not what people want. They want more handouts, it looks like. They want more free money. Trump wanted to send bigger checks. Bigger checks. Okay. I mean,
If he did send the check, he probably would have won the election, but he screwed himself. Hey,
well, he screwed the two people and we lost two U.S. senators. And this is the problem
right.
with Trump. We lost two U.S. senators in
Georgia.
Georgia. And his only hope is that Biden sticks around and then stumbles, falling down the steps 3 days before the election, and Trump wins, which is a likely scenario if Biden runs.
Well, listen, that's that's his problem now, and it's America's problem now too, because regardless if one of those two guys get in, I hope we're wrong, and I hope neither one gets in, and I hope there's somebody else that comes out of the woodwork and can actually talk some sense. But we're going to be in trouble either way. Unfortunately,
Well, it's all going to change. It's all only will change now. Like when I was mayor, it changed and people voted me in because because people were panicked. To be brutally honest, people in Cranston were panicked. And what happens to most elected officials, like the previous mayor of Cranston, Mayor O'Leary, who destroyed the city, they think they're going to get out at a game of musical chairs. They know they destroyed the city. He knew he overspent by $30 million. He just was going to be lieutenant governor by the time anybody figured it out. He was wrong. I pointed it out. I won. I've lost every election since the re-election of that because people, whilst like Laffey's right, unless they're panicked, it's been proven now they're not going to vote for it. They're not going to catch fire. But all going to happen. The panic moment is coming very, very soon. I'm not wrong about this. There is no physical way to repay the interest on the debt of America anymore.
Yeah. So let's get into that and talk some finance, because we have seen in last year, it's about 7 companies that are keeping up the S&P. We can name them if you want,
Right.
but regardless of that, that's what's going on in this country. And if those companies, if something happens to them, the whole thing will tank in a moment. With that said, what do you think is going to go on this year? I know we're playing prediction. I know we're not trying to fearmonger or scare anybody, but we have to talk truth and reality here. With only 7 companies, carrying this, anything could happen, whether it's a financial issue, whether it's a inflation issue. I mean, we've seen this in the past few years that, these issues are coming about fairly fast. So just to kind of, reroute the question.
Yeah.
What
Well, the
do you
stocks,
think?
yeah. Well, the stock market, this is what I do for a living. I hate to tell people, but because then, I could tell you a funny story how I did tell one guy shaving one morning about a company called Cree Research a long time ago. and we had the focus list, and I picked all the stocks from Morgan Keegan, and
Right.
I saw the guy about a year and a half later. The stock had gone from like 20 to 200, and we took it up the
Wow.
focus list at like 120. It was a great winner, but the stock was like back to like 12. This guy said, "What happened to Cree Research?" I guess I hadn't seen the guy. I had no idea what he was talking about. I made an offhand comment a couple of years earlier. He said, "You liked it." I said, "When did I tell you this?" "Oh, a couple of years ago." I said, I don't know what to tell you, buddy. That was a we moved on from that one. We didn't get the top, we didn't get the bottom. We made some money in that one at Morgan Keegan, but so if I say something today about a specific thing, 6 months from now, I may have changed my mind. But here's what I won't change my mind about. There's really only a couple of scenarios. One, if inflation, which I think, unless the money supply continues to contract and the velocity of money goes down, then we will have deflation. But the Fed won't allow that. They will stop doing what they're doing. They will stop quantitative tightening. Remember, the Fed exists to keep really rich people really rich. That's all they care about. Anything else you hear is a total bold-faced lie. They couldn't care less about the middle class. Calling inflation transitory. Think about how wrong they've been. I could go back all the way to Greenspan, how wrong they have been, and no one seems to care at CNBC. They just have them on. They let them make statements all day long. They've given all the power to the Fed. But the truth is this: we can't go back to zero interest rates ever without having a lot higher inflation. Not Zimbabwe inflation, or what was, because the guy in Argentina is going to fix the problem, I think. I may broadcast from there one day. I have to get on and see what's going on. But we could have 8% inflation if these people do what they normally do. They just say, "Oh, we're going to try to get rid of it." But generally speaking, inflation will probably run from 3 to 4%. Inflation actually bottomed from the 9% to 3% last June. It's running at 3.4%, not the mythical two that makes no sense at all that the Fed says they want. And remember, when it was zero, they thought they couldn't get it to two. They couldn't get it up. They took I'm like, what do you mean you can't get it? Of course you can. Just print some more money. So, so if inflation runs at 3.5, most people who want to own a 10 or 20-year bond will require a real rate of return. In other words, 2% over that. So pick the numbers 5.5% or 5%. Today, the 10-year bond yields like 4%, 4.11, I think, before I did the show. So these are things that, like, if rates go higher, now you have an alternative to stocks. The problem will be that when rates go higher, and we can't pay the interest and we keep recycling this stuff, all of a sudden you run into this moment that will happen in America, either tomorrow morning or within 2 years from now, where people will be like, I don't want them at any price.
Mhm.
And then you have the real crisis where maybe people will pay attention to what I've said. And that's one of the reasons I ran for president. There's a body of work out there about how to fix 5 of these problems that no one else has said that I've said on Good Morning America and so forth. So here's the interesting thing to say about though. What if people woke up tomorrow morning and said, because remember, we have what we call the risk-free rate to 10-year treasury at 4.11. We call it risk-free. What if people woke up and said, that's not really risk-free? What's really risk-free are the Apple computer bonds. I don't know what they yield or whatever. I know they were smart to issue long bonds when they could at like 2%. But what if they said IBM bonds are like risk-free? What if we have corporate bonds, for example, always trade with a hot AAA bonds will trade higher than a 10-year treasury, right? So it's
Right.
4.11. A AAA one would be 4.3. And then as the bond rating goes down to like junk, it could be 9% yield. But what if people said that's better? What if it flips and you start seeing corporate bonds trade with a less yield than the US treasuries? Well, all holy hell's going to break loose is what's going to happen. The dollar could tumble. So, and then if you really want to see something unbelievable, watch Nixon's get off the gold standard speech from 1971. Go watch it now or after you listen to this show. Type in Nixon gold speech. You'll see Nixon say literally almost verbatim, and if you quote about the dollar going down, and if you don't leave America, you really wouldn't notice that the dollar's plummeting.
Yeah.
He said it. He remained president. He got reelected. We need to have a strong dollar. And why do we have to have a strong dollar? If the dollar is strong versus other currencies, we remain the reserve currency. If the dollar is strong versus other currencies, people want to invest in America. Japan, which wants to buy US steel, for example, wants to invest in America if they think that their investments repatriated back to Japan are in a stronger dollar to show more profits. If everybody starts thinking the dollar is going to tank, no one's going to want to be in America. This is what we're up against in the 24 to 26 cycle. Some people call the second tuning or whatever these phrases are, where all this stuff is coming together and has to be solved. Lots and lots of problems have to be solved all at once. And we're going to need a leader, and we don't have one.
Yeah.
We don't have one who is willing to tell the people, I'm willing to do it, but I didn't go anywhere per se. I didn't spend $12 million like Christie to go nowhere. Spent 65 grand to go nowhere, but we don't have anybody in the lead. But those people will emerge, and hopefully I'll be one of them who said, I told you this, let's go, let's do this. And that's going to have to be the answer for America at some point. But all these things will now happen. Get ready.
Can we talk about this with because there's a lot of issues right now with credit card debt
Yeah.
in general, and it's over, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's over $1 trillion, maybe even more than that.
More than that.
So what's going to happen? Like, because I talk to some of these other guys that are in finance when we do interviews, and I'm worried that they're putting a little bit of fear mongering, Steve. So I want you to correct the record on this. They're talking that the economy could really tank if we keep spending because, as you just stated, we just keep printing. There's no money to be left. And obviously the inflation level, they're talking about maybe bank runs that could happen down the road. Is this fear mongering? Yeah. Is this truth?
Well, some of it's fear mongering because, but the banks went broke last March and I said there's going to be a crisis right now. These banks, and there was. And what'd the Fed do? Opened the bank window so that any bank could come after the three big failures, giant failures. Bank regulators not paying attention to what was going on in San Francisco. The guy who wasn't paying attention, did he get fired? No. He waited 4 months when no one was noticing, and he retired, like they all do. So this is going to happen again in March. In March, the Fed has to make a decision. When mark to market, these banks are broke. Or we don't do quantitative tightening, we do all these other things. And so we just paste it over again. But the point that can't be ignored is the debt. And the point you said about consumers, the economy is made up of 4 equations, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Consumers, 70% of our economy, roughly, whatever. And they have been spending. G has been growing. In fact, look at the unemployment numbers. Look at the hires. The biggest hiring is still the government. It should be laying people off.
But they're also not talking about in the unemployment numbers the people that have given up looking for work.
Yeah, true. Those people go away. But of course, we have people who aren't coming back to the workforce. We have a whole change in a deformed economy where people don't go into offices and jobs change. All that stuff America can take care of. The part that is really difficult is that now people are getting money in and saying, honey, instead of saying, honey, let's save this, they're saying, we better spend it right now. And they're going off to some other country for vacation, or they're buying whatever they're buying, right? So, but then you talk about the credit card debt, and then you talk about these new forms of credit card debt. I don't know if anybody listening gets this, but I actually get these things like, I'm not talking about buying a new bed where years ago, and you're too young for this, Rob, but it used to be like a layaway program for people. Like you would buy the bed for $2,000, let's say, but you put $200 in for 10 months, and then on Christmas you'd pick up your bed. Now it's a $60 pizza for 4, and they want you to make a payment in 4 equal installments with 20% interest. And you're like, not me, I don't have any of this stuff. But people are like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I'll pay them $15 5 times instead of $60. That's $75. Like, who does this with pizza? So this stuff is not even in your credit rolls, right? This is like the Affirm people, whatever these big companies are. You see the ads, they hit you with them if you go on the internet, and they're like, and that's even my credit card, I pay it off like every other week. I never have a deficit. I have a credit rating of like 800 and something. I don't know how you get to 850 because I can't get there, even though I have no debt, no mortgage, no nothing. Never. I've had one credit card for 27 years. In fact, when you go to see what affects these things, they go like, you've had one credit card for 27 years. That's great. I'm like, yeah. There's no balances. Yeah. But I'm still not at 850, but I'm not at 620 or whatever. So all these things are actually happening. and even when, I don't know, is it COF or Discover, they actually are telling people that our write-offs on our bad, lower interest, lower credit rating people are really starting to expand. People are starting to repossess cars. All this is happening, and nothing happens to the stocks generally, right? But I want people to remind you, but what happens is it all happens at once. Remember, at the end of '07, anybody could have told you there were liars' loans. People make movies about all these heroes. People figured out how to short the market. I was sitting around with Jimmy Hackett in '07 going, this is all going to end badly. He's like, he worked for refi.com. He does refinance. He's like, Steve, let me tell you what's going to happen. And we all knew, but then it all happened.
Yeah.
So all this stuff is going to happen where credit has to be cut back. It's just going to happen in one really, really bad month.
Well, let's talk about, just to go back into the banking issue, because
Yeah.
there's an issue with the banks too, with all this commercial real estate debt
Yeah.
that's not really being spoken about now, especially because of COVID. A lot of people moved out of New York City, any of the big
Yeah.
cities, and they moved to Florida, they moved to Colorado, wherever it may be, where they want to live now, work from home. We have all this commercial real estate that's empty. And
Yeah. Empty.
some of these guys are getting smart, the venture capitalist guys, and they're gonna put apartments in these buildings because they can put the people up in those. But
Yeah.
again, that debt is sitting with these banks, and these banks are going to be in big trouble if they're not already, because of
Yeah.
all this debt keeps being loaded up and up and up. So if you
Right.
could talk to the viewers a little bit
Yeah.
about that also, because that's a big
Well,
problem too.
banks are leveraged 15 to 1. That's why every 20 years they blow up the entire country and then they get bailed out, which their stocks should go to zero. But because they're with the Fed and the elites and the people who write the regulations, right, they go work for big banks or whatever they do. And so everybody's in it together. So they don't make the stock go to zero because they want to tell you, even though it's a bald-faced lie, whether it was President Bush telling you this with the secretary, he worked for Goldman Sachs standing next to him. Oh, okay. All these people are in it together. So banks, if we really wanted to have safe banks, we would have banks with no leverage. And we need to do that. It was one of my policies at stevelaffey.com. Nobody else wants to do it. But the banks being leveraged at roughly 15 to 1 means, unlike your mortgage, that you may have a 30-year mortgage, listen to this, almost nobody does in the commercial world. Almost all commercial loans run something like 7-year loans with 20-year amortization, meaning you pay off very little. You pray that rates go down and and your rentals go up, right? But when it goes the other way, rental payments coming in go down and rates go up, you're totally broke because you're living at 70% to 80% margin of debt. There's very few people who own commercial real estate who have no debt, even though commercial real estate should be run with no debt. Banks should be run with no debt. We wouldn't have problems, right? If everybody put 20% down on buying a home before 2008, we never would have had the 2008 disaster. If people put down 20%, how could you have a disaster? You got skin in the game. You're not walking away from the thing. So this is what's happened. So this year and in 24 and 25, lots of this stuff has to be redone. And so if you had borrowed at 4% with 20-year amortization, 7-year loan, it's coming through, you're gonna pay 9. Well, if I pulled out my HP 12C calculator and started running the numbers for you, and then said the rents went down by 20%, everybody's broke.
Yeah.
Everybody's broke. And that's what's about to happen. It's going to happen. Banks know it's going to happen. So this is our country. This is what we do. Instead of getting prepared for a disaster, the disaster happens and then we bail them out. How many times have we bailed out the airlines in the last 20 years? 3?
No.
None of the stocks went to zero, And now we have a Justice Department that says, well, Spirit Airlines can't merge with JetBlue. And so what's going to happen to Spirit Airlines? They're going to go bankrupt. So, but it's perfectly fine for, Apple Computer to do what they want to do because they're on the in game. So this one, we have the law not being applied equally. We have way too much debt throughout the system, whether it's personal debt, the credit card debt, the student loan debt, the national debt. Everybody in the world, every country basically, maybe not Switzerland, has so much debt. And the reason Switzerland's a good example of what to do is they put in a debt break. 20 years ago. They decided when they had debt to GDP of 24%, that if they had to balance the budget over a business cycle and they couldn't grow debt faster than the economy was growing. 20 years later, they wake up and they have a 24% debt to GDP ratio, and America's over 100. But our congressmen, our senators aren't putting in a debt break. I ran on putting in a debt break to start the process. I'm the only one. I feel like I'm like a cartoon character saying this, right? You know, I'm the only one. There's nobody else, not Christie, not none of these people are recommending this. They're recommended. I hate the party. I hate the other guy. Vote for me.
SteveLaffey.com at Steve Laffey on Twitter. Steve, I want to talk about this too, because, we hear a lot about the real estate. I talked to a real estate agent down here in Florida in a kind of well-off section here in Orlando. And she told me, I said, are you worried about the real estate, because there's not a lot of inventory and people aren't buying right now. A lot of these people are just holding on to their houses right now. And she said, oh, no, the market's not going to drop. I said, but, it's just common knowledge. What goes up must come down. It's not just going to stay up in the air. It's going to come down and hit the ground. She said, oh, no, you're hoping for collapse and it's never going to happen again. I said, I'm thinking in my head, this lady's a terrible real estate agent, but either that or she's in a dreamland by herself. What is your take on real estate right now because of what I just spoke to you about?
Yeah, well, one, it goes back to how we, and the correct word used by former Budget Secretary Stockman, is that we deformed the economy. We allowed rates to be so low for so long that people who have a 2.8% mortgage will not leave their home. Why would they? There's no way to, if there was a way to transfer the mortgage to the new home, they won't leave. So now we have all these real estate agents. Remember, there was one in every corner. They're all going broke themselves because there's so few transactions. But if you look back over a cycle, one of the things to tell young people is there's usually in your lifetime 2 or 3 times to buy real estate. I'm not talking about being a real estate developer, 2 or 3 times in your lifetime because there's a cycle that happens. I bought the biggest property I wanted to buy out here in Fort Collins in 2010. By the grace of God, it was the low tick of real estate. Fort Collins had dropped 7%, a very well-run city that people want to keep moving to. It's not Providence, Rhode Island, that nobody wants to live with a crime, or Detroit, or all these crazy places, right? But there was a good time. And so if you look back on a graph, 2010 was a very good time to buy real estate, 2009, 2010, and it was still okay. Boop, 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 boop. Today, it's the worst time just because of what, again, HP12 calculator. You plug in what it costs for a mortgage. You look at what it costs to rent. If you're just buying a home and you don't know you're going to stay there for 10 years, or you may move in 3 years, you shouldn't really be buying a home because if rates go higher, prices will go down. At some point, people are going to have to sell. They're going to have to move. They're going to die, right? So these things will change. It's just that this is now the worst time. So if you take rents versus home ownership with the mortgage and you need a mortgage, it's the worst time. Now, are there still certain places that you can buy in West Palm Beach that may not have the same kind of disaster with limited supply? Of course, real estate can be local. Are there different forms of real estate that might be cheap? I don't know which ones they are today, but there'll come a time when they're cheap. And when they're cheap, you need to buy. It just isn't today.
Yeah, but we're seeing BlackRock buy up a lot of the real estate that is cheap, which is hurting people like my age and younger.
Yes.
That they can't get into a home. I don't really see a lot of politicians speaking about that. And I know
no,
you don't like this guy,
but so powerful.
Yeah.
If you want to change a law, and again, I'm a free market guy, we should change the law and tell BlackRock to sell these homes. I mean, I'm not saying that's my biggest policy, but they're taking advantage of the fact that they can borrow at much lower rates than most people. And for the last 7 or 8 years, they saw the shortage of homes coming. I did too. My 36 acres is, I only have 20 left. The first 16 are 308 apartment buildings. I live on a piece of property that will be 220 homes one day. Sort of a retirement policy for me. But I did that in 2010. Yeah. I wouldn't do it today on the property to my north. There's a property across the street for $3.5 million and 7 acres. I hope it sells. It makes my property worth more. I'm not buying that property though. Somebody might. So there's a whole cycle. So always try to find what's cheap. But yes, to answer your question, There are large corporations who are turning, if you watch the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, everything into a Potterville. They're destroying neighborhoods. They don't care. They're large corporations. I'm a free market guy, but they simply don't care. And they're backed by who? The Fed, the Congress, the House, the president, because they give millions of dollars, which is why the political process in our country has become so corrupt. If we change the law as I recommended, and my quote unquote conservative friends, which disagree with me on, to say that in a political season for one calendar year, we're going to change how much anybody can give to total and make it $5,000, which means I can give $5,000 to you running for city council in your state, and I'm done for the year. Or I could give 5 people $1,000 because right now, large corporations under the advent of C4s, C3s, all the complication. I don't want to tell you the donors. I don't have to tell you this. They're putting in 60, 100, $200 million. And what's that done to the middle class guy who has $100? He says, I'm not even going to vote. I got no chance. I could give someone $100. What the hell am I doing? Now, the same guy could give someone $100 and everybody else was maxed out at $5,000. He'd be like, all right, I mean, I can't make much of a difference, but I'm going to give $100 to Joe Blow, and people would be back into the process. But people are demoralized. That's why I made the movie Fixing America. They think they're alone. It's got nothing but worse. But why won't we change that law unless I was president?
Yeah.
We won't change it because the money made by local TV ads in New Hampshire and Iowa and through this political season is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that they want to keep. That's
It just seems
It's
like
funny.
we're moving toward a rent society with
Yes.
BlackRock and that group, and
And we got to
that's the
stop
way.
that.
Yeah, and that's just the way it
Stop
is
it.
in
We have to
America.
stop it. It's crazy. You can make a law in Congress that no one entity or entities associated with other entities can own over 100 homes. I don't know. I'm making this up.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's the right answer, but we can do that. We can tell BlackRock to sell these homes. And then, Rob, you buy one. Tell them to sell them the next year and make them plummet out of it. Screw them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a friend of BlackRock. They're not a friend of mine. They're not a friend of the American public. They're in it for the money. They're a friend of China. How many years has BlackRock told you China would be fine? 25? Were they
Yeah.
right or was I right? No, I'm right. Never going to be fine.
It's terrible. Last question.
Yeah.
This is a big audience question. Immigration. We saw what's happened in New York City. It's like a cesspool. Weed smells everywhere. People peeing and urinating everywhere. Doing defecating everywhere in general. Same thing, San Francisco. This is going on all over the country. They just keep leaving the border wide open. People coming in left and right. They say at least 8 million people, could be at least up to 12 to 16 million by the end of this year with the election in general. What do? We can't.
Here's what we do. We first say everybody here who's here illegally has to go home. We never make a dent in that. 2, we go to the country of Mexico and say, you're either on our side or you're at war with us. And therefore, we will collapse your economy. Nothing will cross across the border. We don't care if we have our own recession for a while. You're not letting anybody get to the northern part of your country wandering in. You don't let the Guatemalans wander if you can help it. So we're going to close it down. That's what has to happen. A strong president, Trump never did. He didn't build a wall. He just talked about vilify. I'm not trying to even vilify these people. I just came from, some of these countries. And believe me, there's a lot of poverty. I was in Belize. I
But
really
we
didn't want
can't
to.
take care of the world. We can't take care of all these people. The
We
social
can do
programs.
one other thing. We can do another thing. And we can say, you know what? We're going to stop talking about the Gaza Strip. We're going to talk about Guatemala. We're going to help that. We're going to help anybody. Why aren't we helping not by giving them money? I'm talking about why don't we help them with a rule of law? Why don't we help them with a Peace Corps again? Why don't we help them with education? That money would be well spent? Why don't we get rid of the tyrants like Maduro? I mean, get rid of them and send a message to the guy in Nicaragua and then other countries and say, we want the model to be that guy in Argentina. He loves freedom. He can't comb his hair, but he loves freedom. We want that guy. We're going to support him. And then you watch this thing change. It'll take 20, 30 years. And this is the problem of America. Nobody will do the long-term right thing to do. They do the short-term. And so if we change term limits, if we said that anybody who served in the US Congress or anybody who worked for them could never be a lobbyist, would have to officially, once you serve 2 terms, never show up again. We would, and how about if no one gets paid unless you balance the budget that year? These are laws that would be like, wow, you'd have me do it for 2 terms, and I would be like, I don't want to lobby. What do you want to lobby for? The fruit company, or like be like, some of these clowns are just sitting in Washington wearing their ties all day long, and all they're doing is screwing America. But if you had laws like that, we wouldn't have these problems. That's why we don't have laws like that, because these people are really in control. And we got to stop it. But unfortunately, we're going to get to a point where it's like pre-Civil War over another reason. People think it's not fair. And when the real downturn comes, you're going to see people way more upset than what we've seen in our lifetime that we won't even understand. Because
Which
once this comes, either you're going to have to send a lot more money, inflation is going to be really high, or you're going to have a real recession. I would prefer what I told people running for president. If I was elected, the first couple of years are going to be really rough. They're going to kind of suck. Vote for me, Steve Laffey. It worked in Cranston when I said it was 3 months of really bad times, right? I had to raise taxes, cut spending, fight unions, but it was fixed. And Cranston became one of the best places to live in America, which is sort of shocking, even though I love Cranston, I'm from there, because the rate of change of success. But that's what a president has to say. It's going to take a couple of years to get out of this. All these things are going to change. All the people are going to have to go home. If you employ any of these people, we're going to put you in jail. Think of what would happen next week. Trump didn't do this. If I was president and found people illegally hiring those people and arrested the CEOs, I don't care where they run restaurants. I don't care if they run IBM. I don't care who they run. If I had a Justice Department arresting people and saying they hired Juan's an illegal, they knew it, or even if they didn't know it, I don't care. They're in jail. Here's a picture of the guy in jail waiting, no bail. He's waiting a trial. How many people do you think would hire illegals?
Zero. Yeah. Goose
No
egg.
one's willing to take the hard medicine. There's a lot of hard medicine to deliver. One day I hope I could deliver it. I failed so far. But someone's going to have to deliver the hard medicine, and people then will say what they said in Cranston to me when I won re-election. I didn't like it, but I vote for that guy again. I didn't like it at all. And I would tell people, no, I told you wouldn't like it. America has to go through 2 years of like, boy, but even going through that period of the things I'm talking about, people would see that it would be improving out in the future. And they'd be willing. Americans are still willing to do this, but there's no leadership to say it. So they're like, there's no leadership. These people are all corrupt. Give me another beer and I want to go to the Bahamas.
Yeah. It's truly sad, like I said, and we'll end with that. What's going on with this country? And we do need some people to stand up and fight. But unfortunately, the people that are willing to do this, such as yourself, are not the people that are getting the media attention. The people that are getting the media attention, the people that are just blowhards. So
that's all it is.
yeah.
I mean, Chris Christie is the biggest blowhard and the heaviest blowhard, and he will be hosting a TV show on MSNBC in a couple of weeks, making $500 grand a year, trotting around and saying, jiggling his whole thing. He's a walking, talking disaster for healthcare. He's like $1 trillion disaster staring you in the face. And I don't even make fun of the guy, but obesity is our biggest healthcare problem. It's 40% of our healthcare.
Why can't we have a president that's in good shape? We have Biden that's totally out of it. Trump is a horse.
Give me JFK. The guy had a bad back, but he was like out there playing football with the kids. Trump thinks that the more you exercise, the closer you are to death. He actually, I had to leave it with like a comedy show. Trump thinks, actually said that the more you move your body, the closer you are to death. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Yet, and he's a portly guy, he's not giant Chris Christie because he's taller, but it's bizarro world. I mean, I went by a Victoria's Secret thing in Loveland the other day. I thought I almost had to get in a car accident. There's a giant model. I thought they were all skinny. What happened? I didn't go by for 5 years. There's this model that weighs 240 pounds in a bathing suit. And I'm like, that's an embarrassment. Anyway, I'll leave it with that. Love you, buddy.
Yeah. Oh man, I'll tell you, it is sad what's going on with the overweightness, and everybody's going to be.
It's not okay to be overweight. I'm not trying to again. It's not like when we're kids and we say, "Hey, fatso." I don't go around doing that. I'm older. grabbing
Yeah.
people who are fat, by the waist and give them, we don't do that. I don't do it. Maybe somebody does that, but I mean, I'm not 15 anymore, but let's admit it's a giant problem and stop it. Stop having a milkshake. I mean, here's Starbucks,
Right.
supposedly a liberal company, selling you nothing but sugar and white bread and killing you. And people like loved Starbucks. I
It's
love.
crazy.
What do you?
I've
I don't
never
give a stuff.
drank any Starbucks in my life. I
The worst
credit
coffee
that
of
to
all
this.
time, by the way. It's a terrible tasting coffee. I don't know who makes this stuff, but they charge $5. I only get it if I'm stuck in an airport and I get there at 5 in the morning. It's the only place open. And I'm looking at a line and I'm like, why won't someone just give me a cup of bad coffee over here for $1? Just some guy standing there with a pot. I just drink it. I just need a cup of coffee. Anyway, you're a great man.
Anyways,
Love doing the
all
show
right.
anytime.
SteveLaffey.com, at Steve Laffey on Twitter, and the Substack. Definitely check it out. Fixing America on Amazon. What else is there before we hang up?
That's about it right now, but there'll be more coming.
Primary,
My Mistake is my book, but
yeah,
yes,
primary
people still read
mistake
it.
on Amazon too. All right,
All right.
Steve.
God
We'll
bless.
talk soon.
Talk soon. See you, buddy.